At InDigital, we know that public safety professionals hold themselves to a high standard. In fact, standard doesn't do it justice. In over 25 years working alongside you, carrying millions of calls over our IP networks, your dedication has inspired us. That's why our ESI Net goes beyond industry standards, not only I3 compliant, but designed to adapt to future development for a network you can count on when it matters most. Learn more at indigital.net.
It is a new day for 911 professionals. They have gone from the most important person you will never see to the most vital piece of public safety. Truth be told, they always have been. The curtain has been pulled back, and they are sharing their stories. Welcome to Imagine Listening. Your worst day is our everyday, by Ricardo Martinez II, and narrated by myself, Ricardo Martinez II, and distributed by Beacon Audio Books, copyright 2023. That's right, everyone. Finally, I can let everyone know the rumors are true. Imagine Listening, Your Worst Day is Our Everyday is now available as an audiobook on Audible, and it's a long time coming. Very excited. Not a lot of authors get the opportunity to voice their own book, but I had the honor and privilege to do so. So thank you to Beacon Audio Books, as well as my publisher, Titled Town Publishing, for everything, but especially all of you for making the I Am 911 movement, as well as Imagine Listening, what it is today. I appreciate you all more than you know. So go ahead, head out, stream it, download it, however you consume your audiobooks. Imagine Listening is now available. According to the IAED, the average 911 call center is understaffed by 30%. This nationwide staffing crisis, combined with rising call volumes, is creating an environment that makes one of the toughest jobs on earth even tougher. As next-generation data and tools emerge, it's crucial that vendors build with these challenges in mind, not just meeting the needs of the telecommunicator, but helping to mitigate challenges presented by staffing shortages. That's why Prepared Built Assist, a platform that's been called a game changer by users and the first ever assistive 911 platform. Prepared Assist processes call audio to give you a live transcript, while AI pulls insights from the call, enabling you to two-click copy and paste key information like addresses, suspect descriptions, and more directly into CAD. Prepared Assist also translates text and audio so that you can communicate with non-English callers without an interpreter. Speaking of text, Assist gives you the ability to send outbound text to callers, so you can cut down the time you spend on 911 hangups and communicate with anyone that can't speak. All of these tools are centralized on a single screen, so you don't have to look in a million places to find all the right information or significantly alter your workflow when you adopt the platform. Prepared Assist is built for 911. Visit prepared911.com/assist to learn more and see the platform in action. If Within the Trenches has ever taught you something, open your eyes to what it is like to be a 911 dispatcher, or has inspired you to become one, then help support us and join our Patreon. Get exclusive bonus content, one-of-a-kind swag, discounts on merchandise, ad-free early access to new episodes, and much more. To join, please visit patreon.com/WTT podcast. And if you're an industry partner, we have something for you as well. And now, for the show.
This is Jordan, and you're listening to the Code 7 Podcast Network.
Warning. This episode contains the 3 A's of podcasting: adult content, adult language, and awesomeness. You've been warned.
Welcome to Within the Trenches, true stories from the 911 dispatchers who live them.
Hey, what's going on? This is Ricardo with the Code 7 Podcast Network, and this is Within the Trenches, True Stories from the 911 Dispatchers Who Live Them. This episode is sponsored by InDigital, a leader next-gen core services, and a big shout-out, as always, to subscribers of the podcast, those on Patreon, Circle, and Facebook. Thank you so very much for everything, but especially all of you who are watching, listening, supporting, and sharing. I wouldn't be able to do everything that I do if it wasn't for all of you. So thank you so very much. And it is April 4th. It is 9:10 p.m. Yo, we're doing a night episode, and I'm excited to have my guest on. And by the time this episode comes out, I've already probably surpassed Navigator, and I'm probably now in Colorado. and teaching out there. I've got an 8-hour communications course that I am teaching, and Imagine Listening is part of that as well. And I will be out there actually filming with their dispatch center to highlight them and record episodes with their folks out there. So if that's anything that you're interested in, make sure to get a hold of me. You can go to links.co/WTT podcast, and that's links with 2 i's.co/WTT podcast. And I would love to talk to you. It's just a lot of powerful stories, man. A lot of powerful stories and content and everything that is coming out. Also, I don't think that I've mentioned this yet. I mentioned this on social media a couple of weeks ago, actually, when I was out in Texas at the Mayan Ranch for the 911 leadership training event. And that is that Imagine Listening is going to become its own separate podcast. Now, for Within the Trenches, I've been doing this for over a decade now. Within the Trenches, dispatch stories, of course, but it is interview style. We go back and forth talking and everything. Imagine Listening is going to be different. Imagine Listening is going to actually just have the stories only. You won't hear the banter back and forth of the interview. It is simply going to be the stories. And the first season is going to start out with several of my stories. It's going to be fully immersive, and I am excited to do it. And also, Imagine Listening Book 2 is going to be coming out, and that is going to be August 4th, 2024. At the National APCO Conference in Orlando is where it's going to officially launch, and it'll also launch on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, everywhere that you can get your books. It'll be out there. So look out for all of that. And now that we have all of that out of the way, I'm going to bring up my guest. Again, I'm excited to have him on, and we were actually out at the ranch together with a bunch of other folks, and his name is Jeff. He is a second-generation dispatcher as well as a third-generation fireman, and he's out of WestComm Regional out of Massachusetts. What's up, man?
How's it going, Ricardo? How you doing tonight?
I am doing well. I was actually right before I walked up here. And I put this on an Instagram story. I'll say this really quick before we jump in, but I was watching the Super Mario Brothers movie with my kids, and I was trying to find the original live action one. You can't find it anywhere. I don't. It's not even on YouTube. And so I was looking all over the place. I showed just one little clip to my 7-year-old, and she's like, "What is this?" And I said, "This is the original one. This is the live action one." So we end up going to the one that just came out like last year. And when I left, what I had in my head was when Bowser is singing "Peaches, Peaches, Peaches," like, so on Instagram, I posted a story saying that we were going to be recording an episode, and then I started singing that song, and I probably look like a straight up dork, but I don't care because it was fun. So
You know what? You can blame it on the ranch, because being down there with that group of people, especially when we had our night for karaoke, you jumped right in there and did your song and started
right.
Our karaoke come out after that. So it's contagious. You know, that's one of those big things with Texas.
Exactly. Yeah. There was so much fun that we had out there, and life altering. It's kind of what people said in the group that we're in. And we'll get to that here in a little while as well, because I want to talk to you about that. But I want to jump in. I want to learn more about you. And how did you get into public safety? I mean, I kind of know, seeing how you're second and third generation here, but I want to hear more about this. So how did it get into your blood?
So just like you said, third generation fireman. Grandfather was a call firefighter for our town. Dad got into it when he was around the age of 16. I in turn got into it. I was about 14 years old when I joined the department. Spent a lot of time as a child in the fire station. Being a call department, this is kind of a side job, very similar to volunteer, but we do get paid. We get compensated when we respond to calls. So even as a kid, Dad would get a fire call. We'd be out with Dad. We'd jump in the truck. End up at the fire station. Our jobs as kids, mine and my brothers, we'd have to go around, turn everybody's cars off, their red lights off, close their doors. Then we'd go in, we'd shut the doors of the fire station, and we'd sit and wait for them to come back. So I very much grew up in a firehouse. Mom started, she was an EMT when she got into public safety. My grandmother was actually the first dispatcher in our area. Back then, they had what they referred to as a red phone, and it stayed in my grandparents' living room. So when the red phone rang, Grandma would answer it. She'd take the information. She would then dispatch the fire department right there from her living room back in, I think this was the late 80s, I believe.
What?
Yes. So that was kind of the start of it. Halfway through my childhood, Dad decided he wanted to be a police officer. So he started pursuing that career. Mom decided she was going to get into dispatching. She started pursuing that career. And I, in turn, at some point, decided, you know what, we're going to give dispatching a shot. Firefighting was always going to be my thing, though. Even growing up, I had a bunch of buddies at a young age. They were all in the fire department. Their dads came up with my dad. We were all going to be career firemen together. Eventually, when I graduated high school, I went into my senior year. I was 16. So when I graduated, I was 17. Massachusetts, you had to be 18 to go through the fire academy. So I had a year off there to kind of figure out, what am I going to do in this free time? The goal for me was I always wanted to end up with Springfield, Massachusetts Fire Department. They run no EMS. I'm an EMT now. I'm a big fire guy, but paramedics, they're their own breed. And I always struggled with that a little bit. I like the fire side of things. So Springfield was a big pursuit of mine. Eventually they changed their residency laws, their regulations. So I would have had to move to the city of Springfield. I'm kind of from a rural area here in Massachusetts where not a big city guy. I like my privacy. I like my woods. I'm a big outdoorsman. So I wrote Springfield Fire off before I could even turn 18 and go through their process. 18 years old, I kind of bounced around from jobs. I was a mechanic for a while. I did built houses as a carpenter, cut trees for a living. So I've dabbled in all of it a little bit. Just before my 19th birthday, dispatching job opened up. Dad said, hey, why don't you give it a try? Mom's done it. You clearly have an upbringing in this, so give it a shot. And I found myself in a center and kind of hit the ground running. And here I am now. I just had my 30th birthday back in December. So it's been about 11 years in dispatch, been just over 16 years with the fire department. And to be honest, I'm not looking back. I very much enjoy it, and I want to keep moving forward with it.
Dang. Okay, so let's back up a little bit. I want to go back to when you were a kid, growing up in the firehouse. What was that like? What are some of the things that you remember? And because like for me, and there are a lot of folks as well, you just kind of stumble into public safety, but it gets into your blood right away. But for you, you grew up in this. So what are some of those early memories that you have going into the firehouse, and also I can't even imagine, being a kid going in there, seeing all this cool shit and wanting to play around, but probably also hearing from, your dad or other people saying, hey, get away from that.
Oh, yeah.
Or even being freaked out, like when you hear that first tone out or whatever. So what are some of those early memories that you have?
Well, I want to start with saying, thank God there wasn't cameras back then, because we kind of dabble in when people weren't looking. We always want to see what tools did what, and we couldn't pick up the jaws of life back then. But we always tried to press some buttons here and there, or maybe turn some lights on in the truck. So it was very enjoyable. And again, this was kind of like a second home in a sense. It wasn't rare for us to, as children, me and my younger brother, my brother's 3 years younger than me, so for the two of us to kind of be left in the firehouse alone, that was a common thing. We knew where the remote was, knew where the TV was, we knew open and close all the garage doors. So we'd kind of go in and we'd just get settled on the couch, put on a movie or something, and kind of wait for them to come back from a call. And sometimes it'd be real late at night. We'd fall asleep. Dad would have to carry us out to the car, bring us home. But it was very much a second home, and especially all the guys in the department with them, they were all from this area. Everyone had ties to this community. So looking back at it, there was a lot of family values out of that place that you don't quite realize when you're that young. You have a lot of these role models and leaders. For me, especially when I started getting into it, I was my father's son. So my father had a pretty good reputation within the department. He was a real go-getter, real aggressive fireman. That left some big boots for me to fill. So to trying to step into those, I was treated a little bit differently. But I don't regret it the slightest bit because it made me that much better at the job. But just things like that, just the relationships you developed from such a young age. I had a lot of uncles that weren't blood, a lot of friends that we were friends because their fathers were on the fire department together. So there was a group of like 3 or 4 of us that were very, very close growing up because my father was close with their fathers growing up because they all came up in the fire department together. So big community ties and big family ties that kind of spread across the board, especially from a young age where that was just second nature to me. So looking back at it years later, I realized just how much that actually impacted me and having that kind of outreach with that. But again, I don't regret it in any way. It was a great time to, I hear the word nepotism thrown around a lot because I refer to this, this is a family business. And to say I don't know anything else, I've dabbled in some other jobs, but this is what I know best. And this is kind of, in my opinion, what I do best. So between both the firefighting and the dispatch side of things.
It's got to be kind of hard to go through all of that because of the amount of pressure, but also the fact that you have that camaraderie as well with everyone there. The fact that, like you said, everyone knew everyone and it was close knit. But I get what you mean. Now, this is going to be, it's definitely not the same as what you're saying, but the foundation of it is the same. Where I remember growing up, my dad was the coach of my baseball team. Everyone always used to give me shit, and they would say, "Man, your dad he's gonna let you do this or let you do that. You're gonna get all this play time or whatever." And I would say, "No, like he's very hard on me."
Yep.
Because it was everyone else who got treated differently than
Right.
me because of that, because he didn't want anyone to ever think that he was playing favorites. So it was harder on me. So that's what I mean, baseball team versus fire department,
Well,
but
it's
just
very
that same piece.
right. It correlates very identical. You're almost held to a higher standard because of that.
Right.
And having a dad that's a fireman's great, but then he became a cop, worked his way up. He eventually became chief of police in a town that a lot of my high school aged friends resided in. So I caught it on that end of things, especially through my high school years of like, well, we can't hang out with him or can't talk to him because his dad's a cop, his dad's the chief of police. Hindsight 2020, maybe those weren't the people I wanted to be friends with. Again, another one of those, don't regret it. At the time, I looked at it differently, but then you kind of grow up, you start realizing the full picture of things. And I think his path and the example that he laid for both myself and my brother was very huge because, again, he left some very big boots to fill. And that's a constant battle of just, how can I be better because I have that example in front of me.
I bet you couldn't get away with much.
For the most part, still small town, so we still had our little small town nonsense going on around here, but it was definitely tough, and that was one thing I always said is I would make a great cop because through all my teenage years I had to be smarter than one. So
there you go. Yeah,
that was how I always treated it, and again, it's the way life goes. Policing was never his dream or anything he wanted to do, and he kind of fell into it and said, no, I'm going to do this and run with it. And same with mom. Mom got into dispatch, and I want to say I was around probably 3 or 4 years old when she, left the EMS side of things and she got into dispatching, and she really progressed, the last 25 plus years in that field to the point that she's actually a regional director, regional director now.
Mm-hmm.
She's also part of the class that Joe's teaching at the ranch coming up here in May. My mother takes part in teaching that with him as well. They're currently writing a book together. So dad left some big shoes, but mom did too. And I get it from both sides.
I was going to say, you got a double time, man.
Pretty much so.
Oh, geez. So, you've got all of this that's going on. Now, do you ever remember, because you just said you were about 3 or 4 when your mom got into dispatching and such. So do you remember ever going into the center, like walking around, or some of the things that you would hear. Because like my kids, before I left dispatch, I brought him in there a few times, and my son, who's 20 now, Logan, he remembers going in there and running around, and me telling him not to be running around because you needed to be a little more uh, quiet.
Right. So the first center she started with, very small town center,
Mhm.
one dispatcher. I don't even know if back then they had a full-time police department per se. Um, I remember bits and pieces. I remember the office she was in, kind of the room. I remember like this was one of the first times I'd ever saw a computer as a child, and like, whoa, that thing's cool. What's it do? And it's like I, want to press buttons and start clicking things. And so I remember that first center very, very vaguely. The next agency, agency she moved over to, that was a larger regional center. That center was actually part of the Massachusetts State Police Academy. So if you want to be a Massachusetts State Trooper, this was where you went. And inside of the heart of the building, they had this dispatch center. They dispatched for, I believe it was 8 or 9 towns. I could be wrong. And they called it the fishbowl because you would walk in and you could walk all the way around the center on either side of the hallway. But then there was a door on the side with a couple steps up, and it was windows all the way around, and that was the center. So that one I remember quite a bit. Me and my brother would be up there as kids running around the building, and outside there was a big hill out front we used to slide down when it was wet or snowy out. And at the same time, they're having the Massachusetts State Police Academy going on. So now all of these trooper recruits are out there doing their PT and they're jogging around. And I remember showing up with mom, and again, mom's a dispatcher. She works as a dispatcher for Mass State Police. Well, all these recruits would have to salute her because that was how things worked going through the academy. And she would always laugh about it because she's like, I don't know why they're saluting me. I'm just a dispatcher. But it was part of that thing like, hey, wait a minute, there's 50 to 100 people out here getting screamed at and yelled at like it's military boot camp, but they're stopping to salute my mother. Like, and I remember seeing that as a kid and thinking like, this is kind of, it was a lot to take in. Like there's these people that are, a lot of big burly men that were doing this process back then. And, this was back in late 90s, early 2000s. And to see them stop what they're doing and stand in their tracks and salute my mother, it was kind of powerful to see that take place back then.
That I can only imagine that feeling, that of pride, that all of these folks are stopping and saluting your mom, and just kind of looking at your mom and thinking, damn, like you're awesome. Like I think you're awesome anyway because you're my mom, right? But even more so with
Right.
this environment.
It paints a bigger picture that again, when I was a young kid, I didn't quite understand it. I was like, oh, this is cool to see. But now being a little bit older and getting a full grasp of things, it's like, hey, there's a little bit more to what she's doing than just picking up phones and then picking up a radio and telling people where to go. There was a whole lot more process that as a child you don't get until you become an adult and you get a full grasp of the situation.
That's very true. My son Logan, he I mean, he was younger. He was growing up while I was in dispatch, and I was there a lot, and I missed a lot. But every time I was at home, every moment that I had, I was spending with him. And years later, he I'm recording an episode with his mom because what we were doing was I wanted to capture what it was like for her while I was in dispatch. And Logan is actually doing homework off the camera, offside. And I asked him, what was it like for you, me being gone? And he goes, well, and he was brutally honest, brutal. He
Usually
says,
you give them the chance to ask that question. So
oh, yeah, yeah. And he goes, it's hard to miss what you didn't have. And I went, "Oh," and I just I in the video, I I put my hand on my heart, and his mom goes, "Logan," and I said, "No, no, 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 I'm gonna leave that in there because I want that to be in there, like, that's his honest that's how he felt." Now, years later, though, he ended up writing a report, in class. I believe it was his senior year, and it was because he started to research what I was doing and what I do for a living. And he actually wrote a report on me and what I do and how I help 911 dispatchers share their stories and, the mental health and wellness and stuff. And he showed it to me and I'm like reading it, trying not to cry. and he goes, I didn't understand back then, but I understand now. And I just wanted you to know that I understand. And that's why I share this story, because it's like how you're saying as well. You
Yes.
didn't really appreciate it back then. You didn't know, but now that you're older and you can compare and you've gone through all of this stuff, you appreciate it more and you understand.
Yes. It was a lot of so now where I'm at in my life, single, no children. A big thing for me is the holidays roll around, Thanksgiving,
Mhm.
Christmas. I try to set it up with my coworkers that do have the, the husbands and the wives and the young kids and say, "Hey, I'll take your shifts." Because I was on the other end of that growing up where, we can't do Thanksgiving here. We got to go to the police station and do it with dad, or we got to go to the dispatch center and do it with mom, or sorry, kids, we can't do Christmas first thing in the morning. It's got to be in the afternoon when one of them gets home, or we got to wait because they got to get out of work first. So growing up in it, it was as a child, you get very frustrated. You're like, come on, I got all these presents. I want to open them up. Why can't I?
Right.
You don't know any better. And then becoming an adult and having a better, again, understanding of it all, I try to help that out, especially now with my coworkers being in my situation compared to theirs, because being the kid that dealt with that, it sucks, not having your
Yeah.
parents around, it's tough. Uh, One of the stories, and I like to tell this one a lot, is I grew up racing, riding dirt bikes. I was a big motocross kid. We had plans to go to the track one day. Dad had a police meeting he had to go to. He should have been out by, 9:30. Well, truck was already loaded up with the bikes. We'll go to the track when he gets home. Meeting ran late. Still waiting, looking at the clock, like, hey, we're not even going to get to the track in time. So when we finally got to the track, I think I was about 12 years old. And the class that I was riding in, the smaller bike class, they had just gone out. So I was rushing to get my gear on to get out on the track because we only had essentially two sessions on the track at that point. Couldn't get my dirt bike started. So missed the first one. I had the last session of the day, which was an open session. So now being a little kid on a little bike, I was out there with adults on big bikes. I ended up getting into an accident out on the track. I hit a jump, fell on the landing. I knew that there was a whole pack of bikes behind me. So when I had leaned down to pick my bike up, I happened to turn over my shoulder, and another bike that came off the jump, they didn't have the flags out yet. He didn't see me, and he actually hit me. Knocked me down the landing and knocked me unconscious, shattered my collarbone, uh, ended up with about 30 stitches in my chin. And then I proceeded to get landed on by another 3 or 4 dirt bikes. So I
Oh
was
man.
unconscious. I was unconscious for about 9 minutes or so. I think 10 minutes. They ended up calling the ambulance up. They called a helicopter. So I took a life flight ride to Worcester, Mass, to the trauma center. Spent about a week in the hospital there. But it was just one of those things. Like, dad had work, and I remember being so upset. Like, all this happened because dad he had to be at work. Like, why couldn't he be home? If he was home, we would have went. So again, growing up and having a better understanding of it and seeing him pursue his career all the way to the chief of police for that town that he had that meeting for back then, it was a tough back and forth as a child for me to be like, I love my dad and all, and it's great, but he's not here. He's at work and he's doing this and he's doing that. So years later, I ended up joining the fire department in that town, and this was the first time since he retired as a police chief where I now kind of stepped in. And I'd go out on calls and people were seeing the last name on the back of my coat and they're like, "Hey, wait a minute. Are you Jay's son?" I'm like, "Well," I said, "you're kind of right with that one." I said, "I'm his oldest son, and they would go back and forth. And it was always this, you don't understand what your father did for me, or this time your father was there. Or so now I'm getting the stories from people I don't even know. They're just seeing a name on the back of my coat and it's correlating to those times I was upset as a kid because dad wasn't home. Somebody has a positive story to tell as an outcome of him not being home with us. It's
Oh
just
wow.
it's crazy how it all eventually comes full circle when you become an adult and you're presented with those opportunities.
Oh, those full circle moments. I've got goosebumps now just listening to you say that, because yeah, there's those moments, there's those ripples, right? You can equate it to anything that you're doing, even if it seems just like a drop in the water. It's those ripples that end up going out. And it's something that a good friend of mine, Gary Hills, says. He's a director out in New Jersey, and it's like that, and you don't understand it right away, and sometimes eventually it comes full circle, and those are those ripples, those folks that you ended up meeting that are telling you these stories, and that's got to kind of blow you away when you start hearing these, and then you start kind of piecing things together and, oh, light bulb moment.
Right. You know, dad worked a lot, and we had the family trips and we had the dirt bikes and the toys, and that was great, but still wanted dad in the picture. And
Right. Yeah.
I resented him for a long time going into my teenage years because of that. And then I grew up and I got into public safety, and I started having these interactions with these people in the community. Like, I can't go to our local gas station for a coffee without bumping into somebody that's like, oh, hey, your dad did this, or oh, hey, he did that. So it's amazing that, and again, everyone in public safety knows everybody. Even now that I'm well developed in it, and I go to these trainings, and I end up in trainings with, you know, law enforcement and firefighters and EMTs, and now that I'm getting to the supervisor level, directors and supervisors, and somehow, some way, they've all had an interaction with my dad, as well as my mother too. You know, and I don't want to forget her or leave her out of this, but she was very, as you know, dispatch is kind of that yeti, that it's just a voice. People don't see him a lot. So a lot of people correlated things with my father with the public until mom got to this supervisor level. And now it's mom. You know, I went to Texas, and here I was thinking I was showing up to this place. Nobody knew who I was. And Joe kind of pegged me out that first night. He knew who I was and what I was about and where I was coming from. And that was the correlation with mom. So I do get it on both sides of the family tree, per se.
Oh, like I said in the beginning, that's got to be hard, man, but also very cool to hear from both sides. Now, you know, you end up going through all of this, and you there's that position that comes up. You decide to go into dispatch and everything. You've had all of this experience. Now it's your turn, though, and you're getting in there. You're going through training. Was there anything that surprised you? Was it overwhelming at all? Because now it's your turn. Now you're jumping in there and you're starting to get all of this training. What was that like for you in the beginning?
So lucky for me, with the fire department side of things, again, I kind of treat that as that was part of me growing up. You know, I started as a
Mhm.
teenager, 14 to 18. That was what I never collected a paycheck in those years. That was volunteer. That was because I wanted to be there. That was a hobby of mine. And that's another big reason why where I'm at currently, why I don't pursue full-time firefighting. That scratches more than enough itch for me in my off time. I realized I'm a very good fireman, and in my opinion, I'm a better dispatcher. So getting into dispatch, I was kind of in the generation where Vesta Palace was making its way out. There wasn't a lot of time left with that system, that 911 system.
Mhm.
But I remember going into one of those first weeks of training right after I got hired, and I love telling this story because we had a cop that was in the room. So the agency he was from, they had to be cross certified. They helped out the dispatchers with, you know, breaks and stuff like that. And he was sitting in the back of the class, and I remember the instructor going, "Oh, you must be an officer." She never asked him a word. And it was just the look on his face. He didn't want to be there. He was kind of just that, you know, I'm told I have to be here, so I'm here type of guy. And I was trying to understand, like, why don't you want to be here? Like, this is fun stuff. Like, we're getting into some fun things here. Those first few 3 weeks, 4 weeks of training that I had done to get certified and get into the job was awesome. We ended up doing our EMD, our emergency medical dispatch training at one of the local fire departments. Well, one of the guys that's a lieutenant at that fire department that we were at, who was letting us in and out of the building and showing us the restrooms and stuff, he came up on the fire department with my father. So now I instantly, like, right into dispatch, there it was, another correlation where it was like, hey, now I can kind of step out of class a little bit and be like, hey, haven't seen you in a long time. What's new? You know? And again, it's just everything always resorted back. Once you're in public safety, everybody knows everybody. So to see my name or see my face or start seeing it in a dispatch sense, I was getting some attention from people that I never really expected. My supervisor back then, and I'll say his name because he's a great guy. We still get along very great. David Squires. I was originally hired out of Belchtown Police back then when I started. They were the ones that kind of gave me this big break.
Mhm.
I was very, very blessed to have such a good supervisor and such a great trainer and somebody to kind of show me the right path. David took a liking to me, invested in me a lot, spent a lot of time with me. How can he make me better? And this was something I just assumed he did with everybody. I didn't know any better back then. I was young, still learning. But I'd pick up phone calls from other agencies. I'd put out a bolo or something over the regional radio system. Somebody would call in and say, "Hey, David, you got any more information on that?" And I go, "No, sorry, it's Jeff." "Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, you sounded just like David." So it was just that followed me for years in my career. He ended up I had left that agency. I ended up with another agency for about 10 years, and he worked part-time for that agency as well. David's got his fingers in everything. So between Massachusetts and New Hampshire, I want to say at one point in time, he was dispatching for about 5 or 6 different agencies, just helping out, trying to do what he could. But he always worked every Sunday for the agency I now was working full time. So Sunday mornings, I worked the midnight shift. He worked the Sunday day shift. He'd come in, we'd sit down, we'd have our 15-minute coffee chat together. We catch up once a week. And so we still developed and continued that relationship even years later, where I don't think I'd be quite to the point I am today if I didn't have that leadership role from him right from the beginning.
See, it's always good to have someone like that, whether it be some sort of buddy program, mentorship, or something, even if the agency doesn't have that, but to have someone there to kind of, take you under their wing and just kind of show you a lot of different things. Because when you get in, I mean, you don't know what you don't know, right? And I had a few like that as well. One person, his name was Rob, and he was one of the trainers there, and he wasn't my trainer specifically, but I would talk with him about a bunch of different things. We would run scenarios, and I remember whenever he would take calls from suicidal subjects, that those calls were the ones that I would observe him the most. And sometimes I would hop on the other line. He would tell me, hop on the other line to monitor. And I would say, okay. And I'd already been there for a little while and stuff, but those were the calls that, I really wanted to observe him on, because he would do what I always tell people that you need to be able to do. What I mentioned in my presentation, where my original trainer way back when I started told me one of those main things is to be human. And this is what Rob would do all the time, in the sense, not that we're not human as it is with suicidal callers, but what he would do is he would get all the pertinent information, right? And for those who are watching and listening right now, when you're taking a phone call like this, or any one of these phone calls, after you get all of that information, there's time, whether it be a couple of minutes, 1 minute, whatever, sometimes a way longer time. You have to keep that conversation going. And especially when you're talking to a suicidal subject, you want to keep their mind off of what they originally called for. And until, help gets there. Sometimes that doesn't happen, right? But if you have that opportunity, be human. And what he would do is he would ask, what kind of movies are you into? What kind of music are you into? And then he would just start talking and talking. And then EMS would check out, and that would be the phone call. And he would get off the call, and I'd go, damn, dude, like, that was really good. And so when he ended up leaving, even before that, that's the type of things that I was doing. So I can relate there with you, with the person that you had that kind of, showed you certain things, and you would have those, briefings before they left and when you're coming on, and or vice versa, when you're going off and they're coming on. And it's just always good to have someone that you can just kind of bounce things off of.
Very much so. And David was very much the same type of guy as you're referencing there, where there was just something about him where he could conversate with people, like people in that same scenario where he just, and it was something I always, very similar situation. How can I try to do it like he does, where he takes a step down to this level of emotion, in a sense, where not necessarily matching their energy, but matching that very emotional time for them. And he was good. One of the best dispatchers I've ever seen. And he was another one where, because in this center we did police, fire, EMS, and we were one dispatcher. So it was him or just myself in the room.
Yeah.
I remember one night we ended up getting a very aggressive physical domestic at the same time. And this was a department where we only ran 3 officers. They did have full-time fire EMS, but only 3 officers. So we ended up getting this physical domestic. Almost within 5 minutes, the phones lit up for this was also a very rural area, a large hay barn that was fully involved. So that ended up going to like a second or third alarm working fire. And then almost immediately after that, so that within 30 minutes, we had those 2 incidents, and then a fatal car versus motorcycle accident on one of the main routes through the town. And they were all in different aspects of the town. And this town is the largest geographical town as far as size in Massachusetts. So it was pure chaos. And this was like one of my first few months into the job. And luckily he was there. He came out and the two of us worked it. And I had the chance to watch him work this major incident where I didn't know what I was doing. I'm trying to work one incident. Like, in my opinion, that one of these is more important than the rest. And he's like, no, kid, you're going to learn today because you're going to do all these and you're going to do them right. And it was like, all right, I'll follow your lead. And we finished that up afterwards. And I remember him sit and go, so do you have a better understanding of what we do now? And I went, oh my God, yes, I do. Like, that was like, just that adrenaline high from it was amazing. It was like, holy crap, we just dealt with 3 of the biggest incidents I've ever encountered at once. And to watch him come out and just do it so flawlessly, like I was very blessed to have that as my trainer, as my leader. You know, he just like my parents left some big shoes. Like, so for me, it's like, I very much feel like a small fish in a big pond when it comes to public safety, you know, and especially down in Texas. That was the way I felt walking in the doors in Texas. But after getting through this process, I'm realizing that I feel this way because I had such good leaders. You know, I had leaders that led from the front. That was one thing I love to preach now in both my capacities as a leader in the fire department and in dispatch, is that leaders lead from the front. And it's not a, hey, you're going to do this and you're going to do this. It's, hey, follow me. Let me show you. Let me lead you on how to be successful. And that was a big takeaway, especially through that time down there in Texas, that I know we'll touch base on more in a little bit. But it was, again, getting into dispatch at that time. I don't think I would be to the point I am without having that type of responsible person to take me in, because he very well could have wrote me off from the beginning and been like, all right, this is how you do the job, and that's that. Granted, he's not that type of person, but he invested a lot in me, and for that, I'm forever grateful.
And that legacy continues on with you, with all of those folks. And that's what I love about this as well. You know, a lot of folks that when they get into this, especially if they end up, moving up to either be a supervisor or a CTO, a certified training officer, it's always one of two things. Either they had a bad experience and they want to make sure that those who are coming in don't have that experience. You know, you want to change it, right? You want to break the cycle. Or you had good training, you had good mentors, and you want to continue that legacy again for those who are coming in to continue that cycle, not the
Yes.
vicious one, but the one that sees everyone taking a step forward to basically greatness is what we're, what we're doing, especially because of the types of things that we're doing. You know, you're answering these calls. Anything can happen in 911, or, whatever discipline of public safety that you're in. There's so much that you're dealing with, but to have that example is it's invaluable. It's priceless.
It absolutely is. And I don't, everyone I've encountered, and again, I've had a lot of good leaders, and I've had a lot of bad ones as well, and it very much shaped me in this process. So I did have the good, I did have the bad. I had an understanding, who's right, who's wrong, what path do I want to be? Do I want to follow the path of this guy who I didn't like, or I had issues with, or this girl who I didn't like or have issues with, or whatever the case may be? But having great leaders makes you want to be a great leader, and that was something that I had said within my post of my review from Texas was, when you're in a room of excellence like that, it's hard not to want excellence for yourself. And again, very, very grateful for those opportunities from those people that kind of took me under their wing and said, hey, this is how you can do this job and be successful at it. Or you can just be the guy that shows up and does his 40, takes his check, and goes home. Which one do you want to be? Because one of you is going to be here for a long time and the other one's not.
Right. Yeah. Those are a lot of the folks that, they end up splitting, or those are some of the ones who end up in the news. and you don't want to be that person. Right.
Right.
So, Yeah, along with it, before I get to this next question here, and of course, as long as you feel comfortable answering, it's a call that sticks with you. But before we get to that, just listening to the way you're talking and the types of leadership and everything that you have dealt with, here's a question for you. Um, do you feel that if a lot more centers had that type of leadership, that people would stay? And the reason I say that too is because, everyone is there's a short staffing crisis. The short staff has been going on for years, but it seems to be even more crazy now. And there's a lot of folks who are saying, and of course I'm not dumb, right? I know that there's a lot of different variables that go into the short staffing crisis, money, just all kinds of different things.
Yeah.
However, even with that, if people were able to simply communicate, and the way a recent guest, Brad Flanagan, put, if we as leaders can show our people that we give a shit, they would stay. What do you think about that?
So I watched that podcast that you did with Brad there, and when he made that statement, that one punched me square in the chest. So the agency I'm with now is brand new. I'm a fresh hire for this agency. I got hired in as a supervisor. I left the agency I was with previously, and this was before. I apologize. Belchtown was before this. So I started with Belchtown in my career with David. At the same time, I got hired part time in another agency. I spent 10 years with that agency in total. I ended up getting a full time offer. Money was better, hours were better, so I ended up with them. That was why I parted ways with Belchtown. I'd been at that agency for 10 years, and it got to a point where I was working midnights. I was getting stagnant. I wasn't advancing anymore, and I wasn't learning. Um, and I started to blame how I was feeling on the hours. It was, oh, it's the midnight shift that's killing me. I can't do these hours anymore. Then it was, well, maybe it's the job. Maybe I don't want to be in public safety anymore. It's dealing with people on their worst day. And then I really started to kind of butt heads with the supervisor, and we used to be very close, and he was a line dispatcher that we worked together. He was one of my partners. He became a boss, and first year as a boss, he did great, and he did a lot of successful things in that agency. Slowly after that, though, with me not progressing or advancing, I got stagnant, and I wanted to progress the center. Well, I'm not the boss, so how do I do this? And eventually, we started butting heads, and it got to a point where I didn't want to do this job anymore. I was so burnt out from all of it and the stress levels, and I'm not sleeping and I'm not eating, and my life was deteriorating very rapidly, and I was getting into a real low point there. Luckily for me, I had this opportunity to go to this new center as a supervisor. Um, for It was a lot of what ifs. I was in a place where I had my career. I didn't have to leave. I had seniority. I had 10 years invested. Do I really want to start over? Like, I have it good here. I make good money. I love because that old agency, we were inside the police department. So I had officers that were some of my best friends. Some of them since leaving that agency, I still talk to almost every day. One of my dispatch partners from Midnights, I still talk to him almost every day. So I was leaving these relationships. And in that agency, when I got hired there, I was the baby. I was 19, 20 years old, and the next closest person in age was another dispatcher. She had 3 or 4 years older than me. So I really grew up, in my opinion, in that agency. A lot of my life lessons and good and bad times through my life were while I was there. So it was very tough to try and get away from that. But it finally got to a point where I realized me and that supervisor were at a crossroads that we clearly weren't coming back from. I started getting this reputation as a hothead because I didn't know how to handle myself. So prior to Texas, I said he's 100% of the problem, and that's why I left. Leaving Texas, I realized that he was 50% of the problem, and the way I reacted and handled myself was the other 50%. So at some point in time, I'm going to have a sit down with that supervisor, and then we're going to have a chat, and I owe him an apology because Texas made me realize I'm not proud with how I handled myself, and I became the problem. And I didn't know that at the time. But luckily, the new agency, they sent me to this training in Texas. I showed up as one person after a week of a lot of tears and a lot of heartache and discovering myself. I left as the kid I originally was. So another one of those moments where everything comes full circle.
Man, it's something when you go through all of this, and I tell people too in one of the classes that I teach that sometimes when you're going through this, you have to take a moment eventually to ask yourself, almost looking in the mirror and asking, is it me? Am I part of this? Because no one ever wants to look into the mirror and have to admit that they're also, in a way, part of the problem.
Yeah.
But a lot of times too, back to this, this question that if we could get people to communicate, and this is not just leadership, this is everyone as a whole, if we can communicate with each other, which is funny to say, right? Because we're awesome at communications, but when we go to talk to each other, it's not always the same.
No, it is not.
If we could do that, though, if we could use all of our skills that we have on each other without sounding weird, but like communication wise,
right,
I think a lot of people would stay. Now, of course, there are situations where you could live closer and get paid a little more. But the thing is even though you're leaving one place, you're still in the profession, you're still in there, and you're not simply splitting. So I feel like if we can really master that piece and let people know that they're welcomed, recognized, all of that, I think that we can really tackle this short staffing issue. Now, really quick before we get into the ranch here, and again, as long as you feel comfortable sharing, one of the calls that kind of sticks with you.
So I did this portion for the Imagine Listening when we were down at the ranch.
Mm-hmm.
I know you had recorded that. I'm going to leave that story for that specific moment whenever you're ready to post it.
Of course.
But to touch base on that, I'm sure people will hear that when that one comes out. Early on in my career, I want to say within that first year and a half, I had dealt with 3 suicides in probably a 4 or 5 month span. The very first one I had, and this one was a tough one because I was still new, still learning. First time I encountered it, I hadn't even heard of a coworker since I'd been there that dealt with one. This gentleman had called, and as soon as I answered, all he said was, "Here's my name, here's my address. Tell my wife I'm sorry." And I heard what I thought was him closing a flip phone. This was still when flip phones were a thing back then. I thought he just hung up on me. I didn't think much of it. And then I dispatched, do our routine, do the dispatch. Officers get there. And the sergeant that was working calls me. He says, what did he say exactly? And I, verbatim read it back to him. He's like, okay. And they had located some things in the house, some paperwork that was laid out, some items that were out of place. And they're like, well, can you call him back? And I'm calling, and I'm not getting any answer. And they ended up locating him in the shed where he, in fact, committed suicide. And I didn't even have a chance to try and work the call. So my very first encounter was just a notification from him, hey, this is what I'm doing, and tell my wife. And that one sucked because as somebody that's new and in this job, how do you deal with that? And I get he was having some issues, and I wish there was something I could have done to help him. But I remember being so mad that wasn't fair to me. I wasn't ready for that. So I kind of got thrown to the fire real quick with that one. Shortly after that, I had dealt with a train conductor that called. Said, I'm driving a train. I just killed somebody. I went, what? He goes, oh, yeah, probably about a mile and a half back by the time I got the train stopped and got my phone out. This is where you're going to find them. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, hey, again, I'm new to this job. I'm just getting an understanding, and same type of scenario where there's nothing you can do. A person had just walked out, looked right up at the conductor and made eye contact and laid down. And that was their decision that day and what they wanted. And, I feel bad for that train conductor because he was put in that same situation that I was put in. And that was tough. And then the third incident I had was the one I talked about in Imagine Listening, where when that one comes out, all of this will have a better understanding for the viewers and the listeners here. But it was like boom, boom, boom in a row. And, I've only worked like maybe one good structure fire or one good car accident. And when I say good, as a dispatcher, those real hot priority calls where you're like, hey, it gets the blood flowing. So I was still learning and still dealing with how do I cope with all this stuff. And again, I'm a 19-year-old kid. I barely have I figured out. I'm still trying to figure out how to, essentially be a man in a sense. And now I'm dealing with all that. So to deal with all those right away, it was very, very tough. And that was where I started changing as a person. I had to be, I came up in that generation of, hey kid, you're going to see some shit. You're going to deal with some shit. Suck it up, go back to work. Like there was no outreach. There was no debrief. There's nobody there to help back then. It was, this is the job and this is what you signed up for. So if you want to get that paycheck on Friday, suck it up and deal with it. And that's where I now, after dealing with everything and getting to the point I'm at, when I say Texas changed me, your program, Texas, that whole portion we did, that was huge because that was my chance. That was my opportunity to discuss these things. It's like, hey, yeah, I talked to mom and dad about it because they're in public safety, so they get it, but it's still mom and dad, and mom and dad have their own stories that I don't hear about because I'm their kid. Why would they give me that? So
yeah,
the way things happen in Texas, it was so eye-opening to be like, now's my chance to talk about it. And then everybody else in the room gets excited and they want to talk about theirs. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, this is so powerful in a sense because it becomes really contagious.
It's thank you right off the bat. Thank you for sharing those, because I think a lot of people and that's why I love doing what I do and to be able to share these stories, because a lot of people don't understand. They don't understand what it is that we do on a daily basis, and some of the things that we go through. There's still a lot of people, because of probably what they see on TV and all. I mean, of course it's dramatized, they show everything, but even before a lot of those shows, like, oh, you just answer the phone, right? Like you answer the phone, you send help out. And I would tell people, I mean, that is not even scratching the surface. Like, yeah, that's part of it, but there is so much more that goes in. So those who just, heard, you talking about these back-to-backs that you had within this short amount of time, and also the age that you're at, that is a straight kick to the senses, where you've not dealt with, a lot of that before. And especially because, that it's one thing to be working certain things face to face, but when you are taking these phone calls, you are hearing everything. And I tell people, one ear is listening to everything in the room, the other ear is listening to everything within the environment of that phone call. So for example, you've got an open line and you just hear someone breathing. Well, you're putting it in as long as you have the information on the screen, because if it's on a cell phone, it's you might not have the location. Of
Yeah.
course, there's better technology now where you can potentially get a right on good location, but it doesn't always happen. Technology isn't always going to 100%, have something there for you. So let's just say, for example, it's a landline call. It's a phone that's at the person's house, which is kind of, it's not something that people always have either.
Oh, no, those are a real thing. You used to have a cord to it. You couldn't walk too far
Right.
away from the receiver there.
Yeah, exactly. So let's just say you have, an address like that pops up on the screen, and you're listening to this person breathing, but you're listening to everything within the environment of that phone call, and piecing what you're hearing in your head so that those that are heading out have at least a little bit of a picture of what it is that they're going or getting into. And a lot of times it's a lot worse what you've typed in than what it actually is. So I'm glad that you shared that and put that out there, because again, a lot of people don't get it. They don't understand.
No, it's definitely one of those jobs. And again, even the fire department, I was exposed to a lot at a young age. My first death encounter, 14 years old, go to a car accident. We had a decapitation. 14 years old. I was a child. And why nobody stopped me or grabbed me before I ever got up to that car that day, that one still sits with me. Like, why didn't anybody else look out for me that day? And that was something I should never saw that. I was too young for that. There's nothing anybody was going to do. Why let that even be an option? And that's a big thing now as being a leader, especially with the fire department side of things, where we had worked a motorcycle fatal a few years back, and we had a young kid, fresh 18 on the department. The person involved was DOA, and he jumped, the young kid that was on the truck with us, he jumped off the truck, and I stopped him, and I said, get back in the truck. Well, we got a job to do. I said, I understand we have a job to do, but you have a life to live as well. And I was you once, and I was that young kid, and you don't need to see this, and you don't need to deal with it. At some point in time, you will. I'm like, but you're newer to this. Let there be baby steps, and this moment's going to impact you. So you don't need that image in your head. Again, it's just one of those, how can we adapt and how can we be better? Back then, I wish somebody helped me out in that process. I hope in this process, I helped him out. Eventually you're going to have to be thrown to the fire, per se. You're going to have to face it and deal with it. But I think if you can do it in increments or baby steps where you can learn to deal with it better than just being totally overloaded with it, it'll help you in the long run. For me with dispatching, I was working eve shift back then. I dealt with all these incidents, and I was good at my job. I was really good. And when I was in the center, that was where my head was, my heart was. I was stable. I was good. I love the chaos. I'm one of those people where I don't claim to be very smart. Not a smart person. I'm a reactive person. So you put a bunch of chaos in front of me and let me react to it. I don't have to think. I just work. But then I get out of work at midnight. 21-year-old kid, there ain't a whole lot to do at 12 o'clock in the morning, especially when you live next door to a bar that closes at 2:30. So unfortunately, I developed a bad drinking problem, and I quickly became an alcoholic. And I was getting to a real low point in my early 20s just because of my job and what I was dealing with. Luckily for me, and I say this with the most respect as I can, but I ended up getting myself a DUI. I didn't know better back then. So that was a very, kick to the stomach of like, hey, you need to get it together and figure this out. You clearly have a problem. I have parents that were very supportive and family that was very supportive. So they helped me through that process. And eventually I had gotten sober for about 5 years, turned my life around. I had a boss where that agency that I was with for 10 years, that agency should have fired me. They should have never kept me for what I got involved with. And I understand that. But my boss, I remember calling her the next day after I had got out of everything and said, hey, I'm sorry. Like, this is what happened. And I was honest and I opened up about it. I told her, I said, I have a problem and it's because of this job and I don't know what to do. And she's like, Jeff, you're too good at this job to walk away, but you need to start believing in yourself. And she stuck her neck out for me, and I kept my job because of her. So that was where I said, hey, family supportive. My boss is like, you're better than this, figure it out. So I spent a lot of time where I've resolved those issues in my life, but at the same time, I've now buried my head into work. So it was work, where 60, 70, 80-hour weeks were every week. And I haven't regretted it. My personal life has lacked because of it, my relationships, and 30 years old, no, not married, no kids, but it made me better at my job and having those opportunities and those chances to fail. I'm a big believer in failing. Like you can hand a book to me, I can read it. I'm not going to know how to do it. Let me do it hands-on and be a hands-on learner, and let me fail, because the embarrassment of failing causes you, in my opinion, to really put some roots in the ground of like, hey, I can't do this again. I now know how it feels to not be successful in that aspect. I'm too embarrassed and disappointed in myself that I have to be better. And for me, it was like, I don't regret anything that's gotten me to this point now, because I have a much clearer head on my shoulders. And I have this, especially after Texas was very big, because I was still confused and lost going into Texas. Like I said, I was thinking about getting out of public safety altogether. It was just a lot of stress and a lot of what ifs. I didn't want to be a boss. I didn't want to be a supervisor. I took a promotion to lieutenant at the fire department last year. That was kind of thrust upon me. And I'm like, I don't want it. Like, I want to be a worker. I enjoy working. My fire chief had sat me down. He says, listen, you're already the senior guy. You're already leading our trainings. You're already the one that everyone looks to at the department. So if you don't take it, who's going to take it? Somebody below you? I said, so now you're going to fight with them and butt heads because they're going to look at you for the answers, but they have the higher title. So that was a pivotal moment for me where it's like, hey, I understand I'm only, at the time I was 29. I said, I understand I'm only 29 and I'm still a worker, but maybe it's time to start assuming the supervisory role and this leadership role and really kind of progress with it. Same with dispatch. I was burnt out. I was tired. I wasn't progressing anymore. So why don't we take the next step? How can I be better when I've, in my opinion, kind of hit the end of my road as far as progressing as just a line worker? And then I go to Texas and Joe's program and this opportunity, and it was just, that was why it was so impactful for me to spend that week down there, because that was me trying to find my purpose. I didn't know what it was anymore, and then you spend a week down there, and he kind of has a way to rewire your brain and your heart and your mind, where it's like, I had said it in my post that I had put on social media after the fact, where he gives you this experience where it's almost an out of body experience. And you're looking at yourself going, what is it that you want? And what is it you're good at? And how can you be better? And Texas for me was life changing. I came back with a new purpose and a new drive and a new passion for everything I'm doing.
Oh man. I'll say this right off the bat. I'm so happy that we're doing this and that you're sharing everything. Thank you so much for being so open for others to be able to hear this as well, because it's inspiring, man. I'm a firm believer that we all personally at one point in our lives end up hitting our own form of rock bottom, whatever that might be. And that's when you figure out what you are made of and what you can do, because you end up crawling back, clawing back up to the top, whatever that top might be, and you start learning. And I'm the same way. I have failed at many, many things, but every time I have failed, I have learned. And throughout all of these years that I've been doing what I've been doing, it's also all about adapting and evolving. So for you, ending up, going through all of this, still feeling kind of, where am I going with this or whichever. And now we segue to the ranch, and you get over there and you're starting already to adapt and evolve. And I want to say this really quick, that there are those, when you walk in to that building where the saloon and the kitchen and everything else is, I don't know how you felt, but for me, for whatever reason, because I've been there, going there like 4 years now, twice a year, and closing it out and doing Imagine Listening. But going in, something felt different, and it felt already like everyone almost needed to be there for one reason or another. And like you have those moments where I'll put it this way. It's like when you're going into high school, and not that this is high school, but the same type of feeling when you're going into school and you don't really know a lot of people, and you're like, oh man, I don't know how this is going to go. And then you start talking to people and you realize there's people there that are the same as you, that come from where you come from. And then you quickly start to build those bonds where you're kind of nervous, but you're also kind of excited as well to see what is going to happen. And I felt that immediately from all of you. And I mean, I had just made the long drive from Indiana to Texas, and I was exhausted, but I was feeding off of that energy from all of you being there right on that first day with the meet and greet, the questions, all of it. And I remember Joe walking up and he goes, hey man, he goes, welcome back. And I said, man, I'm excited to be here. And I said, it feels different. And he goes, it does. He goes, I don't know what it is. He goes, but I'm excited for this week. So for you getting in there, what was it like for you right off the bat in the beginning?
So part of my hiring process for this new agency, this was a requirement. If I were to take this job, I had to go to Texas for a week. Big thing with me is I'm a Northeast boy. I'll hop in the truck. I'll drive up and down the East Coast. I'm okay with it. I don't like planes. Not a flyer. Not big into it. So knowing I was going to Texas, that was a kind of a long plane ride for me. Another thing for me with Texas itself was I always said if I went to, I always wanted to go. I was scared to go because I knew I was going to fall in love with it and not want to come home. So I'm trying to deal with both. I'm excited to be there, but at the same time, I'm scared of the plane. I was supposed to have another supervisor from my agency that was supposed to come on the trip as well. She ended up having a medical emergency just before the trip. She couldn't go. So I relied on her a lot for this whole, like, hey, where are we going? What time we got to be there? How are we going to navigate this airport? Like, I was just hoping she was going to send me a text, hey, meet me here at this time and we're good to go. That didn't happen. And that was very last minute. So now I'm like, oh, okay, I have to grow up and I got to do this. I actually had the pleasure of having Amy, Joe's assistant, pick me up at the airport. So we had the 40-minute ride down into Bandera to the Mayan Ranch there. And we chatted and we just kind of hit it off and we were talking, and there's a lot about, who am I and who is she and where's she from and where am I from and kind of what brought us here at this point. Amy was awesome because she was very settling. And that was where I wasn't not a chatty person. So all of this, even tonight, this is all new. And a lot of it is because of Texas, where I did this job and I get out of work. I want to go back to my bubble. I want to not talk to people or deal with their problems or, kind of just leave me alone and let me get lost in my own head, because that's where I had been for a long time. My boss had told me too, going down there, that, hey, you have to network at this event. This is part of the requirement going there. You have to meet these people. You have to talk to these people, find out about them. And I'm like, well, I like my job and I like talking about. Joe does a point there where he says, who's afraid of public speaking? And I threw my hand up. Like, I am not a public speaker. I'm not a good speaker, in my opinion. What I'm good at is talking about the things I'm passionate about. Mm-hmm. Let me use that to my advantage. And let's talk about, hey, where are you from? What's your agency do? What kind of hours you guys work? Things like that. Like, so to talk shop, I'll talk somebody's ear off all day about, our jobs. And then that first night, it was that same type of process where, okay, well, who are you? Where are you from? What brings you here? Tell me about your agency. That was huge. That was the icebreaker in the room, because it was like, you could tell nobody wanted to have those conversations to start. But then it's like, oh, well, we're just talking work. I can talk work. That's what we all do. We talk for a living at our job. So you start with that process, and it really broke the ice. For me, we did that. We had already done the dinner process. The night was kind of winding down, or come to find out, just beginning. Having the saloon there, I said, when I have a drinking problem, I try to stay away from it. I've gotten to the point where I can control it. I can have my one or two, and I call it a night. So I went into the saloon that night. I was going to have my one, and I said, this is the only time I'll be in here all week. Went in there. I had my one drink, and then I had, I believe you had spoke with Tyler quite a bit. So Tyler Gray from Oktibbeha County, Mississippi. Tyler comes in and introduced himself, and we started talking, and I quickly gave him the title Mr. Mississippi because his accent was so thick it's hard to miss. But me and Tyler, we started talking, and we just kept talking and talking and talking. And I said to him, I said, I finished my one beer, I'm going to go. And he's like, what do you mean? I said, I have a drinking problem. I can't be sitting in the saloon all night because I go 0 to 100. So let me take myself out of the situation and keep a lid on it. And Tyler's like, what's the problem? He's like, I got you. And I'm like, yeah, okay. Man, I just met you and all, but not a whole lot of people can control me when I get to that point. He's like, no, like, clearly something's going on here where we're having this connection. He's like, I got you. Let's keep talking and keep doing it. He's like, you do realize we've been sitting here for about an hour and a half, right? And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I thought it was 10 minutes of talking. I didn't realize it took me an hour and a half to have my one drink. And I'm like, whoa, something's different. And that was where it was like, okay, first night went great. Day number 2, going through the classes, Joe doing his whole bit. And now you're opening up and you're like, I have to embrace this. I have to accept this. People are crying, they're laughing. But now we're sharing it together in the room, and now we're getting more and more comfortable. And just the way the week progresses, it's amazing, because when you show up to the doors at the Mayan Ranch, you're one person. And then when you leave that final day, you're somebody, whether you were that person years ago and you got lost along the way, or you've now become somebody entirely new. You don't leave the same person you showed up as unless you don't embrace the course and don't embrace that entire week in itself. There was some people in that class that you could tell this was a requirement. They didn't want to be there. So, but that specific group, for the most part, everybody really started embracing it and opening up, and it just like, hey, we're going to deal with some shit this week that none of us planned on dealing with. But at the same time, we now have each other to lean on. It was really life-changing. It was life-changing for me in that scenario, especially that night with Tyler, where, again, I don't talk to strangers. Like, I might seem like I'm all hunky-dory having conversations, and it's it's amazing how quickly you can connect with these people because you're all the same. We're all there because we do the same job. We all don't want to talk to each other because we deal with the same shit. Like, and then once you put that through your mind, you're like, wait a minute, I'm just talking to somebody that's the same as me. They just look different. He's got a little bit of a more Southern accent. So it's cool to see it all open up and just really run wild with your feelings and your emotions. Because again, doing our job, we don't have those opportunities. So that place in itself to give us that chance was just so huge and life changing.
It's definitely all of that, all of that and more. And you go in and you think, well, this is just going to be another training, for this week. We've all been to a lot of trainings. That's all this is going to be. But right away, you get there and it's on a ranch in the middle of nowhere. And you've got these cabins, which are cool. And you do that meet and greet, which I'm so glad that they switched it up and did it that first night right before dinner and everything, because usually it was Tuesday morning. That first morning is when you would do it, and it was so much cooler to be able to do it there that first night and then get right into classes the next day. Excuse me. And Joe is he's a different beast altogether, and he puts together all of these speakers. And you're right, just the way you said, you get out of it what you put in. If you're just going there and you're just whatever, you're going to have a whatever experience.
Yep.
But if you embrace what you are being taught, if you embrace the other folks that are there, I mean, we only have each other. And I'm not just talking about the excuse me, the classes themselves and being out there at the ranch. I'm talking in general. We have each other in this profession, in this thin gold line. We have each other, and we're there to lean on each other. And I think that also helps promote that as well. And I want to play something for you really quick, something for you to hear, and see if I can put this on my microphone. And because I'm going to play this. It's a video from a keynote that Joe did for Dare to Be Great 5. And so I want to play this here really quick, just so that you can hear this, and for others who are watching and listening as well to be able to hear this too, as we're going into the wrap up of this episode. So here it is.
I have one question for you, and it's a question I want you to think about when you leave today. The question is, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? Have you been wringing your hands, wanting to do something, but scared of what other people are going to say? What are you waiting for? Conditions to be perfect? That never happens. What are you waiting for? How many years have already gone by and you haven't done what you know you really need to do because you're afraid? Because daring is scary. What are you waiting for? I know it seems like an obvious question, but it's a really central question. What are you waiting for? Nobody guaranteed you 80 years. No one guaranteed you 85 years. Trust me, I'm about to hit 60 years old. I wish I had my 20s back. I wish there were things I had done before that I waited till I was 40 and 50. What is it you think you're waiting for? Guess what? The naysayers never go away. The BS on social media never goes away. People criticizing you never goes away. Financial situation is always precarious. When you have people who have a lot of money often have precarious situations. People who have no money have precarious situations. The factor here, the key factor, is your movement in a forward direction. So what are you waiting for?
It's some powerful stuff. And I'll be honest, Texas, I'm cried out enough after Texas, but Joe just has such a way of just getting to you. Like a lot of the times, if you can't think for yourself, have a conversation with Joe Serio, because you're absolutely going to be able to try and track down some thoughts afterwards. But that's huge. I think for me, and being in public safety and dealing with the death and destruction we do, I never had long-term goals. I never had a end game or end goal or anything like that. I was a day-to-day person. And because of the line of work we do, at any point in time, I could be on my way in that night and that could be it. Something could happen. I could get in an accident. It could be lights out, and I could get called to a fire, could go into a structure fire and have a ceiling collapse, and that's it, lights out. So for me, I was a day-to-day person. And that was how I had been for the better half of 15, 16 years now. I turned 30 back in December. I never saw myself making it to 30. And I panicked because I didn't know what was next for me in life. Am I going to make it to 35? Am I going to make it to 31? And then you deal with this course that Joe does and that you take part in, having Hank Hunt in there and Tracy Ertl and just all of these phenomenal, powerful instructors that you can't help yourself but start thinking of long-term goals and what's next for me. I don't want to be this day-to-day person anymore. I don't want to sit here reading my hands waiting for that. What's next? I need to go figure it out. I need to find it. And that was a big part of Texas where I was comfortable where I was. And I'm very uncomfortable where I'm at right now after coming back. But I feel so much more confident and powerful about it. Like, you have to embrace that kind of insecurity and nervousness and being scared for the what if. Start embracing it and start going for it and trying to make those changes. And I'm looking at long-term goals where, all right, next year, what can I do? What can I do in this year? The next 365 days come back from Texas. What can I do? Part of that was, and I'll be honest, a lot of it had to do with your segment on the Friday, the closing segment. I had the conversation with Joe before leaving the ranch, and I said to Joe that I don't know what yet, but I want to come back next year and I want to be a part of this. And not as a student again. I said, I want to come back as an instructor. I said, I don't know exactly how or what I want to teach just yet. I said, I have a year to work on it. But I now had 365 days from that statement to figure out what's next. I returned home. I've been working on a course myself that I'm going to try to, I actually submitted my application through APCO. We have the APCO conference up here in Maine. I believe it's in the end of October. So I submitted the application as a instructor for a lecture for that. If it gets picked, if I have the opportunity to present it, great. If it goes well, great. If I get asked back to the ranch next year to come in as an instructor, then I met that goal for this year. But if I don't, keep on trying. And just because I didn't make it happen now doesn't mean I can't write another great lecture or another great course. Or a big thing, and we kind of talked about this in messages and between our social media posts with one another, was just how powerful your segment was to me. And the fact that sitting there listening to it, and I was pretty good about writing my reviews as these kind of lectures were developing. And yours, I didn't. I wanted to wait. I wanted to get a whole part of it was because you're crying so damn much through the process that you can't write anything. But I needed that. I needed that time to kind of sit there and let it all sink in with what you were doing. And then I proceeded to, on this, however the scale worked out, do you agree, do you not disagree, or do you strongly agree? I felt the need to draw that box over a little bit more and put that check mark in and saying, this is outside the scale of what we need in this course. To just have the ability to accept the things that are weighing on your chest, weighing on your shoulders, and just circling in your head, and share them in a room, and then to watch everyone else's eyes light up because they're like, hey, I'm dealing with the same shit too. And it's heavy shit. The things that were said in the room that day. And again, I don't want to spoil it because I know you were able to record it and these are going to be things coming out in the future. But, for anybody that's watching or listening through this whole podcast, made it this far, be prepared because what's coming out and coming down the pipeline with that session was so damn powerful. It was very, very huge. And that was when, you had posted my review. And it was one of those, I sat there and I saw it and I said, do I say something? Do I mind my own business? Because again, these were anonymous things. My name was never on it. So, and I kind of hemmed and hawed it. And I actually reached out. So there's a group of about 5 or 6 of us from Texas who we've kept in contact every day. And when I say every day, there's like 500 to 1,000 text messages a day that we have with one another. To the point last weekend, we're like, hey, why don't we do an hour video chat just to catch up? I went, hey guys, hold on, let me check the time. And I looked and I went, we started at 8 o'clock p.m. on the East Coast. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. We had been on this trip with one another for 8 hours, and we're like, where did the time go? It was so powerful for us, and it was everything. It was families, it was work, it was how are you doing now that you're back, and what changes are you making? How are your emotions? How much more have you cried since coming home? I did more crying in Texas in that 1 week than I had done in the last 15 years of my life. It's so powerful. And Joe does a great portion with having you understand yourself, but your portion was very impactful because it gave us that chance to get rid of that weight and this dark cloud that kind of sits with every dispatcher that deals with these nasty, disturbing calls. Like, again, we're very quiet and nobody recognizes us, and that's kind of how dispatching is. It's just you sit in a dark room, but to have the chance to voice these problems and these feelings in a room of comfort, like, that's huge. And what you're doing is huge. And I want to really emphasize this to everyone listening, that this can be very life-changing, just like the ranch, as long as you embrace it. Everyone has their shit they're dealing with. Talk about it. Submit it to the podcast. Come on with Ricardo and have your chance to express these things. Do it through the Imagine Listening sessions. It is insane. You gave me this book when I shared my story. And I got to the airport that day in San Antonio, and I flipped open that book and I just started reading and reading and reading. And I'm in an airport full of people bawling my eyes out reading these stories. That is essentially our therapy. You can pay all sorts of money to go see a therapist, or you can jump into a session like this where you feel more comfortable that the people you're talking to have been through it. They're dealing with it too. They know it. Dispatchers are known for being the calm voice during the storm. And I said it to you, but who's our calm voice? And that is you. And what you're doing is life-changing and impactful. I don't want to bring you to tears because then I'll start crying too. I just want that to be known with everybody that's if they're still here and listening, that this can be just like Texas. As long as you embrace it, you're going to get a lot out of this. And I sure as hell did, because there was a lot of weight that I had sitting on top of me for a long time that I could finally, let go of. And thank you for that, because that was something that I don't know if I ever would have talked about or came to terms with. And you gave me that opportunity, and I could have just kept my hand down and put my head down and minded my own business. But a little bit of Joe kicked in, gave me a swift kick in the ass and said, put your hand up and tell your story. So I did. And I'm very glad I did. So thank you for that.
Man, thank you for that as well. I feel like almost in a way what I just played, what Joe was saying, that's the kind of that part that kicked into you about telling that story. What are you waiting for? And you did so. Excuse me. And there were so many more people who shared as well after you shared. And I think that's one of the things that I love the most about doing Imagine Listening, is because, and there was a time where people had said, that's a really cool name, but why did you choose that? And I said, because that's exactly what I want people to do. I want them to imagine listening to a call like this, which is why I say in the intro, I want you to, become the dispatcher who's taken each call and imagine listening, because that is exactly what we're doing. That's what it's all about. And when I first started it, I didn't know how it was going to go. There wasn't a lot of people sharing, but as soon as I said, does anyone want to write theirs down? So many people started ripping paper, writing things down. And then it took one person to share a story. And then everyone else wanted to share a story as well. And this one at the most recent ranch, there was so many people who wanted to share a story. I think we're going to be switching it up a little bit, where I'm going to have basically the whole Friday so that I can tell my part, do Imagine Listening, and then fully get into the funny part of it as well. Because for those who are watching and listening, if you've never been in Imagine Listening session before, it's usually just an hour. If I get a chance for it to be 2 hours or even an hour and a half, that extra part I'm sharing my story so that folks can feel comfortable in sharing theirs. And then for 30 minutes, we share some of the gut-wrenching, harder calls and some of them saves as well. And then the last 30 minutes is the funny part because I don't ever want anyone to leave without having that moment to have some of those funnier stories. But with this one, we kind of ran out of time a little bit, but I feel like it was still good because there were so many people who wanted to share some of those harder stories, and it was powerful. It's hard to explain to people what it is like to be in that room when you're sharing these stories, but also sharing stories in a safe place with folks who know exactly what it is that you're going through. And then once we get to that part, I always ask, who's ready to laugh? And everyone's always like, I'm ready to laugh. Let's do it. And then we start sharing the funny stories, and it's a good way to end up wrapping everything up because the whole week you're learning all of this stuff. It's leadership, but you're learning more so about yourself and how you can pursue different things, how you can go head to head with whatever it is that is bothering you and doing it with confidence. And also, again, learning about yourself, but also others that are there who have dealt with the same things, which brings you all together even more, even closer. Like you said, you've got about 5 folks or so that you guys have been messaging over and over and over and just keeping in contact, which I think is amazing. And then at the end of the week, you get to my session and we go through it, and there's a lot of times where when we get to my part, people start looking around like, holy shit, I had no idea like it was going to be this, that we were going to be going into this type of thing. And it's a good way to wrap it up. So as we're talking about the wrap up and we're going into the wrap up of this episode, dude, it's been an honor to have you on. This has been so good to learn more about you, to hear your story and also the progress and the fact that you are talking with all of these folks and keeping in contact and everything. I've got one last question for you. And that is, you've got about 16 years total in public safety. So, with all the knowledge that you have now, the knowledge, the experience, everything that you've gone through, if you could go back in time to talk to yourself in the beginning, what would you tell yourself? What advice would you give yourself?
Well, knowing that everything that's happened from the good to the bad has got me to this point, and even up until Texas, I was still kind of lost and confused. But since that course and coming back and being at the position I'm in now, I tell them to buckle the fuck up and hold on because it's going to be a wild ride. But in the long term of things, I have a great group of guys within my fire department now that I can teach and I can lead. And I'm doing the same type of things with the new dispatch center as a supervisor and having the ability to continue to grow that. Look, nobody's perfect. You're going to have your ups and downs. You're going to have the bumps in the road. But I think being where I'm at now with the mental clarity and the willingness to be better in every aspect, I tell them to hold the fuck on because you're going to have to embrace it.
Awesome. Thank you, man. Thank you so much for being on. It has been an honor to have you on here. And, thank you for the kind words, just all of it. That really puts everything into perspective of not only the ranch, but also what I do with Imagine Listening. And I appreciate you very, very much. Thank you for being on.
And thank you very much for having me. I know we talked at the end of the week there, especially after that session, and things evolved and you found out a little bit more when my review came to light and I brought it to your attention. Again, I don't regret anything. So I'm glad I stepped up and told my story. I'm glad I had that opportunity to write that review, and I'm glad it affected you the way it did, because for you to be at your crossroads, I hope you understand just how much it impacted me and how much of a change that, excuse me, how much of a change that really was for me. So thank you for that opportunity. Thank you for the opportunity to let me kind of come on tonight and us to have this little chat in this session. So
awesome.
thanks.
Yeah, no, thank you, man. And I will be right back here with you in just one moment. And for those who are watching and listening, if you have any comments, questions, or you ever want to be on the show, you can email me, and that's going to be wttpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, that is wttpodcast@gmail.com. And you can follow us on social media. You can become a subscriber of the podcast as well and help support what I do here. And to do all of that, you can simply go to links.co/WTT podcast. And that's links with 2 I's.co/WTT podcast. And you'll find everything there. My email, all of the social media, where to follow, the latest episode where you can listen, but also there's a button there where you can schedule an episode. So if you're new to dispatch, you're a seasoned dispatcher, or you're a retired dispatcher, I have been doing this for over a decade. All of this started from my own struggle in dispatch, and it was therapeutic to help share my stories. And I thought, if it's therapeutic for me, it might be therapeutic for others. And also for those in the public or those in other disciplines of public safety to learn what it is exactly that you do on a daily basis, that you're not just listening, or rather, you're not just a drone. You're not just picking up the phone. There's so much more that goes into it, and I would love to share your story. So hit me up. Again, it's links with 2 I's.co/WTT podcast. There's a button there. You just scroll down just a little bit and you can schedule an episode. You can also find the 2 links where you can support, whether it be on Facebook or Patreon. You can order the book from there. Imagine listening. You can also pre-order book number 2. And then, of course, the podcast and dispatch merchandise that I do. All of that is on there on the bio page, so make sure to check that out. This broadcast has been sponsored by InDigital, a leader in next-gen core services, and this can be seen on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn Live, sometimes Instagram, as well as X, formerly Twitter. It's X. Either way, for the audio portion of this, you can listen 24/7, and that's on Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, your favorite podcasting app, and withinthetrenches.net. Have a good one, everyone, and I will see you all in the next one. According to the IAED, the average 911 call center is understaffed by 30%. This nationwide staffing crisis, combined with rising call volumes, is creating an environment that makes one of the toughest jobs on earth even tougher. As next-generation data and tools emerge, it's crucial that vendors build with these challenges in mind, not just meeting the needs of the telecommunicator, but helping to mitigate challenges presented by staffing shortages. That's why Prepared Built Assist, a platform that's been called a game changer by users and the first ever assistive 911 platform. Prepared Assist processes call audio to give you a live transcript, while AI pulls insights from the call, enabling you to 2-click copy and paste key information like addresses, suspect descriptions, and more directly into CAD. Prepared Assist also translates text and audio so that you can communicate with non-English callers without an interpreter. Speaking of text, Assist gives you the ability to send outbound text to callers, so you can cut down the time you spend on 911 hangups and communicate with anyone that can't speak. All of these tools are centralized on a single screen, so you don't have to look in a million places to find all the right information or significantly alter your workflow when you adopt the platform. Prepared Assist is built for 911. Visit prepared911.com/assist to learn more and see the platform